How's it going, folks? In last video, we talked about some of the basics of how we use handlebars. And in this video, we're going to talk about some of the more advanced features the handlebars has available. So let's take a look at our project here. So we started off with our router. So we have our home that gets rendered, and here's our home page. And then we have a link to the profile, which is where we put most of our stuff. And the profile had an address, it had some connections, it has this little computed property here, and then it has a bunch of other stuff in here. We made use of our each, we made use of our else, etc. So let's get this started up. And localhost 3001. All right, go to the profile. Okay. Make this a little smaller just so we have some ability to do this. Okay, so let's add some more stuff to our connections to make it a little more complicated. So name John. Let's say met. Please stop. Where did we meet them? Well, met John in San Jose. Met Patty in Palo Alto, let's just say. And where do we meet Steve? Let's say we met Steve in San Francisco. And let's talk about like when we met them. When met. So we could provide a string here, but what I'm going to provide is actually a date object. And the date object can take in a timestamp. Let's put in a random timestamp here. Actually, you know what? Let's just do this. Put in date.now. Not 100% sure that that's the right syntax, but we'll figure it out. And let's just say we met all these people on the same day, because that's just the easier thing to deal with than me actually putting in a bunch of stuff. And okay, so let's go into our profile now. And so we say, okay, connection name, and actually let's do a span around this. Now let's do a span around the whole thing. Met connection.met, and then span on dot, what did I call that? I did call it when met. All right, let's see what we get. Oh, these are all I could also make them divs to make them. This is happening because the span is an inline element. There we go. Okay, John, so they met. We'll deal with this in a minute. So this is kind of, it's nice to have that each, right? But let's say maybe we want to have this particular block in a couple different places. So let's say also we want to be able to have maybe this sort of thing on our home as well. So we say, okay. And then we're going to go here, and we could just grab this whole block, right? Connections here, put that here. Now if we go back to main, oh, main doesn't actually have the connections. Never mind. Let's hook that up then. Let's actually take this then, and we're going to say that, and then connections and connections, like that. All right. So now we have them here, we have them here, right? Now here's the problem. Let's say I want to change this so it has something else, and I said like, oh, you know what? I want to put this in the same thing. So I want to say on here. Get rid of that span. Okay, well that works here, and then when I go to profile, I'm like, oh, it didn't change, right? So I have to make that change here. That's kind of tiring, especially if we make a lot of changes. So Handlebars has something for this. They call them partials. And let's take a look at what that does. So what a partial does is you basically take a little chunk of code and you tell Handlebars, hey, I want you to reuse this multiple times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, partials, and then I'm going to say connection.handlebars. Okay. Inside connection handlebars, I'm just going to take this and we're going to put that in there. So here's that connection text, right? Just this div, the span, this span, etc. Now, let's use home as an example. Instead of this whole thing, I'm actually going to use something slightly different. I'm going to use a syntax we haven't worked with before. Greater than connection. Well, actually, let's rename this connection details. Just so it's not confusing, connection details. And now, if we load home, you can see all this stuff shows up, but it's like, hey, completely blank. So how do we fix that? Well, here's the thing. This template is looking for connection. Now here's where partials get a little funky. If I put these inside of an each, partials are meant to be inside an each, basically. Whatever object I have here inside this each gets spread over that template. So connection has normally a name, a met, and a when met. I can just get rid of the connection here. And name, met, and when met, Handlebars automatically knows to put them in there because connection is in the each, and I'm calling this from within each. And that's basically it, right? It's basically magic that does it for you. So if I load that now, you can see all that shows up. Okay. Now if I go into profile, I can do the same thing. Arrow, connection, details. If I go to profile, same thing. So now if I change this here, if I say on when met, okay, it changes in profile and it changes in main because they're using the same partial for their template data. This is useful in cases like this where you need to reuse something across multiple pages. Okay, so that's a partial. Now, let's talk about this date here. This isn't great, right? It's kind of nasty. I don't really like this full format that it has here, but this is the default format. This is ISO format. Well, not true ISO format, but this is how JavaScript prints dates that it doesn't know how else to print them. So let's take a look at that. We've got our when met. So what we can do for this is we can actually define a helper. What is a helper? It's basically a function that you can call from Handlebars. So let's start that off. I'll make a utils directory inside it and call helpers. Okay. Let's make a function, format time, and it inputs a date. Well, let's call it format date because that makes more sense. We'll just put some simple debug stuff, and then we're going to export it like that. Okay. So this is the function that we want to run on our code in Handlebars. So how do we get Handlebars to know about that? Well, if we go into our server, let's import this then. And then when we create our Handlebars, this actually takes an object. It's a settings object. And helpers is one of the properties that we can pass into that settings object. And that registers all those helper methods that we have in here. So now we have format date. Well, how do we call this then? Okay, so let's go in here. We've got our when met. Okay, restart our server. No difference so far, right? Because we haven't actually turned it on. Well, in order to call that, we would actually just say format date. And I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see what that is. The name of the helper and then the parameter to be passed into the helper. This when met gets passed in as the date here. So let's see what that turns out as. Not that one. Now you can see formatting date and then the same date. That isn't super helpful, right? That gives us the same thing, but that does tell us that this function is actually being called because there's no other way that this text could have gotten in there. So let's actually make a nice get full year date dot oops month date. Let's try that out. We have to restart our server because I made a code change. Well, that definitely looks better. Except right now, you can see by my clock, it is December 29th. It is not November 29th. So why am I seeing 11 here? Well, because date.getMonth always returns a 0 indexed month. For some reason, it goes from 0 to 11 rather than from 1 to 12. So we just add 1 to it. If you were really doing something like this in a production environment, I would recommend that you install day.js or moment.js and use that because they're much more powerful for formatting this stuff. All right, there you go. And you can see this is just JavaScript, really. So anything you want, you could put in here. If you wanted to have a return, like, oh, you know, format a full connection, and you just wanted to pass connection data in here and have a bunch of really complicated conditionals, you can do that. And so whatever gets returned from here is what gets printed onto the screen, HTML or not. So I remember when we were back in the profile and we were having some trouble with the is San Jose, and we had to pre-compute that, we could have also made a helper. We could have made a helper that was just like check city, and then you pass the city into it, and then it does the complicated stuff on the back end to figure out what should go in there. So if the conditionals here or the loops here are not powerful enough for you, then you can definitely just create a helper method that just runs raw JavaScript and does whatever you want it to. So that can be really powerful. That's pretty much it. There's a little bit of complexity if you want to hook handlebars into a sequelize object, because sequelize objects are a little complicated. You need to get the plain object for sequelize, but that is going to be another video. So yeah, here we covered partials. Remember, they have to be in the partials directory specifically because handlebars looks for them in there. And then you use this little greater than sign and the name of the partial. If you're in an each, the each parameter gets spread into the partial. So you have that, all those values. Then we also went over custom helpers. Technically, each and if are also helpers. They're just not custom helpers. They're things that Handlebars gives for you, but you can see they're called in a similar way. So yeah. Hopefully this is helpful, and I'll see you all in class.